Claire Barrett realized she'd forgotten her passport halfway to LaGuardia Airport, and panic surged through her like ice water. Her hands frantically searched through her messenger bag, boarding pass, conference materials, wallet, but no passport. She'd left it on the dresser the night before after checking its expiration date one last time. The oversight felt catastrophic. This Berlin conference represented everything Claire had worked toward for 6 months. As executive director of Sterling Cyber Defense, she was scheduled to deliver a keynote address about blockchain security threats to the International Digital Safety Consortium. This was her moment to prove herself among the international specialists who would scrutinize every word she spoke. Claire took the next exit and navigated back toward Williamsburg through increasingly familiar streets, mentally calculating alternate flights. If she moved quickly enough, she could catch the evening departure. When she entered their townhouse through the front entrance, the door stood ajar, unusual since Marcus never left doors unlocked. But her singular focus on retrieving her passport and returning to the airport prevented her from processing this warning sign. Then Marcus's voice drifted from upstairs, and something in his tone stopped her cold. He was speaking to someone with casual intimacy, discussing property transfers and foreclosure proceedings, boasting about how effortless deceiving her had been. Claire moved closer to the staircase, her litigation background overriding the impulse to announce her presence. What she heard during the next 60 seconds made her hands shake and her heart turn to ice. Her husband was not who she thought he was. Their marriage was not what she believed it to be. And she was standing in her own home, listening to him plan her complete destruction while he thought she was safely boarding a flight to another continent. The drive back through Brooklyn streets Claire had known her entire life took 25 minutes. She kept replaying the morning in her head, searching for signs she'd missed. Marcus had woken before her, as he often did on her travel days. She'd found him in the kitchen making breakfast, cinnamon pancakes with her favorite coffee already brewed and poured into her travel mug. He'd kissed her while she ate, his hand resting on the small of her back, telling her he'd miss her terribly for the next 5 days. She had believed every word. Why wouldn't she? 9 years of marriage had given her no reason to doubt his sincerity or question his love. This Berlin conference represented everything Claire had worked toward since taking over her father's company 5 years ago. Her father had started Sterling as a small cybersecurity consulting practice working out of a converted warehouse in Bushwick with 3 employees and a handful of local clients. When he died suddenly from a stroke, Claire had been 29 years old with a law degree and exactly 0 experience running a technology company. Everyone expected her to sell. The offers came in within days of the funeral, competitors circling, assuming she'd be too overwhelmed with grief and inexperience to do anything else. Instead, she'd spent 5 years transforming his modest practice into a firm that now protected Fortune 500 companies from digital threats. They had 55 employees, offices in 4 cities, an annual revenue that would have made her father proud. Marcus had been there through all of it. They'd met at a business conference in Manhattan just 8 months after her father died. She'd been drowning in grief and the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly running a company she barely understood. He'd approached her after her presentation on compliance regulations, genuinely interested in her work, asking intelligent questions that showed he'd actually been listening. He was handsome in an understated way, with dark hair beginning to silver at the temples and hazel eyes that seemed to truly see her, not just the professional facade she'd learned to wear. Their courtship felt natural and unhurried. They spent evenings having long conversations over dinner about their dreams and fears. He would cook while she worked late on client proposals, bringing her wine and checking in without making her feel guilty about the hours she devoted to building the company. He never complained about her schedule or demanded she choose between him and her career. Instead, he supported her, encouraged her, became the person she trusted most in the world. When he proposed during a weekend trip to the Adirondacks, standing on a dock at sunset with the water turning gold around them, she said yes without a single hesitation. The wedding had been small and intimate, just family and close friends held in her mother's garden in Park Slope. Marcus had cried when he saw her walking down the makeshift aisle between rows of white chairs, and Claire remembered thinking her heart would burst from happiness. Her mother had embraced him afterward, whispering that her father would have loved him, that she was grateful Claire had found someone who would take care of her the way her father always had. Marcus had been particularly wonderful with Claire's mother after they married. She lived alone in the Park Slope townhouse where Claire had grown up, the same building where her father had carried her mother over the threshold as a young bride in 1987. The property was more than just a home. It was 3 generations of family history, memories embedded in every room, her father's presence still lingering in the garden he'd cultivated and the bookshelves he'd built with his own hands. After her father died, Claire's mother struggled with both the grief and the practical aspects of managing the property. The building had rental units on the ground floor that required constant maintenance, tenant issues that needed handling, repairs that couldn't wait, property taxes that seemed to increase every year as the neighborhood gentrified around her. She found all of it overwhelming, and Claire watched her confidence erode as she tried to navigate a world her father had always managed for her. Marcus volunteered to help her, spending weekends fixing leaking faucets and reviewing financial documents that made her eyes glaze over with confusion. Claire had been so grateful for his willingness to step into that role, to care for her mother as if she were his own family. He was patient with her in ways Claire sometimes struggled to be, never making her feel foolish for not understanding things that seemed obvious to him. When Marcus suggested consolidating some of the family financial accounts to make management easier, it seemed like a thoughtful solution from someone who genuinely wanted to ease their burdens. Claire's mother signed the power of attorney documents he prepared, trusting him completely. Claire countersigned them without reading the fine print, too busy with a major client presentation to scrutinize paperwork from her own husband. They were handing him the keys to everything Claire's parents had built, and neither of them had any idea what they were doing. Now Claire stood in the foyer of their townhouse with her hand gripping the banister, listening to Marcus's voice drift down from his third-floor office. The tone was completely different from anything she'd heard before. There was satisfaction in it, almost pleasure, as he discussed property transfers and foreclosure proceedings with someone he called darling. The word made her chest tighten. He had never called her darling. He used her name, sometimes adding terms of endearment like sweetheart or honey, but darling belonged to someone else. Claire forced herself to stay absolutely still and listen. Her legal training kicked in, overriding the emotional response that wanted her to run up those stairs and confront him immediately. Gather information first. Never make accusations without evidence. These were principles that had served her well in business, and now she applied them to her crumbling marriage without even thinking about it. No, don't worry, Marcus was saying, his tone reassuring in a way that made her stomach turn. By the time she gets back in 5 days, everything will be locked down. The property transfer documents are ready. Her mother's brownstone will be in foreclosure by Tuesday. The old woman doesn't even check her accounts anymore. Her mother's brownstone. The words landed like a physical assault. That house was worth nearly $2 million in the current market, but its value went far beyond money. 3 generations of her family had lived there. Her grandmother had died in the upstairs bedroom. Her father had proposed to her mother in the garden. Claire had taken her first steps on the hardwood floors of the living room. Every brick held memory. Every room contained pieces of people they had loved and lost. And Marcus was discussing it as casually as if it were just another property transaction. And the best part, he continued, and Claire could hear the smile in his voice, the satisfaction of someone who believed himself clever and untouchable, she signed everything herself. Every single document over the past year. She actually thanked me for helping manage the family properties while she was so busy with work. The memory came rushing back with sickening clarity. 8 months ago, Marcus had presented her with a stack of papers at the kitchen table one evening. He'd explained that consolidating the family accounts would make everything easier to manage, that her mother was getting confused by having multiple statements from different banks, that streamlining the process would reduce stress for everyone. Claire had been preparing for a major client presentation at the time, her laptop open beside her dinner plate, her mind already halfway through the security protocols she needed to review. She'd signed where he indicated without reading carefully, trusting him completely because he was her husband, and why would her husband hurt her? After all these years of pretending to love that frigid, controlling woman, Marcus said, and his voice changed slightly, becoming harder and colder, I'm finally going to get what I deserve, what we both deserve, darling. Pretending. 9 years of marriage reduced to a performance. 9 years of her love met with contempt she'd been too blind to see. She'll land in Berlin completely clueless, Marcus continued. I've already scheduled the bank appointments for tomorrow morning. The foreclosure auction is set for Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday, we'll have control of the property and can flip it immediately. The market in Park Slope is insane right now. We're looking at a clean $700,000 profit after paying off the mortgage and the equity line. $700,000. That was what her mother's home was worth to him. Not the memories or the history or the fact that an elderly woman who had already lost her husband would now lose the only place she had left that felt like home. Just numbers on a balance sheet. Just profit to be extracted and divided. I know, baby. I know, he said, his voice softening with affection that made Claire's chest physically hurt. Just a few more days and we're done. We can finally stop pretending and get out of here. Maybe somewhere warm this time. You've been talking about Costa Rica. We could do that. Buy something on the beach. The life we've been planning for all these years. Costa Rica. The beach house. The life they'd been planning. While Claire worked 60-hour weeks building a company, while she traveled for conferences and client meetings, while she trusted him to be the stable foundation of their marriage, he'd been planning an escape with another woman. Planning to steal everything and disappear while she was left with nothing but the wreckage of a life she thought was real. Claire stood in that foyer and felt something fundamental shift inside her. Something that felt like a death and a rebirth happening simultaneously. The woman who had walked out of this house 45 minutes ago no longer existed. She had been trusting, loving, perhaps even naive in her belief that the man she married was exactly who he presented himself to be. The woman standing here now was someone entirely different, someone colder, someone whose mind was already beginning to work through the implications of what she'd heard with the same analytical precision she applied to cybersecurity threats at work. Marcus believed she was gone. He thought he had 5 days to finalize his scheme while she remained blissfully ignorant across an ocean. He had no idea she was standing 20 feet below him, listening to every word, her legal mind already beginning to catalog evidence and construct strategy. Claire's hands were shaking, but not from fear or even heartbreak. They were shaking from rage that felt like electricity running through her veins, from the sudden understanding that she'd been living inside an elaborate con for 9 years, and from the cold determination to make Marcus pay for every single lie he'd ever told her. Claire backed away from the stairs with the same careful precision she'd used to approach them, avoiding the floorboards she knew would creak. When she reached the front door and slipped outside, the click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet street. She walked to her car with measured steps, though every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. Once inside, she sat motionless for several long minutes, staring at their townhouse through the windshield, trying to reconcile the building she'd loved with the crime scene it had just become. Her phone sat in the cup holder. She picked it up and stared at the screen, watching it blur as tears finally came, not tears of sadness, but tears of rage so intense they felt like they were burning her eyes. Claire drove to a coffee shop in Park Slope, 3 neighborhoods away, somewhere Marcus would have no reason to look for her, even if he somehow discovered she hadn't boarded her flight. The coffee shop was quiet at this hour, with only a few customers scattered at tables, most of them absorbed in laptops or books. She chose a booth in the back corner where she could see the entrance but remain relatively hidden from casual observation. The first call went to Nicole, her executive assistant. She answered on the second ring, her voice carrying its usual professional efficiency. Claire, you should be boarding soon. Is everything okay? I need you to do something for me, Claire said, keeping her voice as steady as possible. And I need you not to ask questions right now. Can you do that? There was a brief pause, and Claire could almost hear her recalculating, recognizing the seriousness in her tone. Nicole had worked for Claire for 6 years. She knew when something was genuinely wrong. Of course. What do you need? Call the conference organizers in Berlin. Tell them I've had a family emergency and cannot attend. Then I need you to cover for me at the office. If anyone asks where I am, tell them I'm at the conference as scheduled, unreachable except by email. Another pause, longer this time. Claire, what's going on? Are you safe? That simple question nearly shattered the composure Claire was desperately trying to maintain. Nicole wasn't just an employee. She'd become a friend over the years, someone who noticed when Claire was stressed or overwhelmed, who brought her coffee during long afternoons and covered for her when meetings ran late. The concern in her voice made tears prick at Claire's eyes, but she forced them back. "I'm safe," Claire managed to say. "I promise I'll explain everything soon, but right now I need you to trust me and do exactly what I'm asking." "You're in Berlin," Nicole said quietly. "Got it, Claire. Whatever's happening, I've got your back." Claire ended the call before her voice could break and sat staring at her phone screen for a long moment. One step completed. Now for the harder part. Victoria Chen had been Claire's college roommate, the person who had seen her through her father's death and the early terrifying months of running Sterling when she had no idea what she was doing. After graduation, Victoria had become a forensic accountant, specializing in tracking hidden assets and uncovering financial fraud for law firms and private clients. They still met for dinner once a month when their schedules allowed, maintaining the kind of deep friendship that survives distance and busy careers. If anyone could help Claire understand the scope of what Marcus had done, it was Victoria. She answered on the first ring. "Claire, I thought you were flying to Berlin today." "I need your help," Claire said, and this time she couldn't keep the slight tremor out of her voice. "And I need absolute confidentiality. Can you come to Brooklyn right now?" "What's wrong? You sound strange." "Please, Victoria. I can't explain over the phone. Can you come? I'm in my office in Manhattan. I can be there in 30 minutes. "Where?" Claire gave her the address of the coffee shop and hung up, then ordered a coffee she had no intention of drinking just to justify occupying the booth. The barista was young, probably a college student working a shift between classes, and she smiled at Claire with the kind of automatic friendliness that felt completely disconnected from the reality Claire was living in. Victoria arrived in 28 minutes, her red hair pulled back in a professional bun, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she slid into the booth across from Claire and got a good look at her face. "Talk to me," she said simply. So Claire told her everything she'd overheard, the conversation about property transfers and foreclosures, her mother's brownstone being sold out from under her, the documents she'd signed without understanding what they really meant, the woman Marcus called darling, his partner in whatever scheme he'd been running. By the time Claire finished, Victoria's expression had transformed from alarm into the cold professional focus Claire had seen her use when analyzing financial records in court cases. "We need to look at your accounts," Victoria said, already pulling her laptop from her bag. "All of them. Joint accounts, investment portfolios, property holdings, everything. And we need to do it right now before he has any chance to realize you know." "I can access most of it from my phone," Claire said, pulling up her banking app with fingers that still trembled slightly. What they discovered over the next 2 hours made the initial shock of overhearing Marcus's conversation seem almost quaint by comparison. Victoria worked with methodical precision, guiding Claire through accessing accounts she'd barely looked at in months because she'd trusted her husband to manage their finances competently. Trust. That word kept echoing in Claire's head with increasingly bitter irony. The joint checking account looked normal at first glance, regular deposits from Claire's salary, normal expenses for groceries, utilities, mortgage payments. But when Victoria started examining the transaction history more carefully, patterns emerged that made Claire's stomach turn. Small transfers out of the account, usually between $2,000 and $4,000, happening every few weeks for the past 18 months. The amounts were carefully calibrated to stay below the threshold that would trigger automatic fraud alerts from the bank. "Where is this money going?" Claire asked, watching Victoria's fingers fly across her keyboard. "An account registered to something called Riverside Holdings," Victoria said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Give me a few minutes. I need to make some calls." She stepped outside to use her phone, speaking in the abbreviated technical shorthand of financial forensic specialists, and Claire sat alone in the booth watching her through the window. Victoria made 3 calls, each one progressively longer, and with each conversation, her expression grew grimmer. When she finally came back inside and sat down across from Claire, her face was grim. "Claire, she said carefully, Marcus Reed Brennan is not his real name. Or rather, Brennan is not his original surname. She turned her laptop screen toward Claire, and Claire found herself staring at a criminal record. Marcus Reed, convicted of investment fraud in Massachusetts 9 years ago. Served 3 years in a minimum security prison, released on parole and immediately filed for a legal name change, adding Brennan as his surname to create a fresh identity that wouldn't trigger background checks or raise red flags with potential victims. 9 years ago. 1 year before Claire met him at that business conference in Manhattan. 1 year before he'd approached her after her presentation with what she believed was genuine interest in her work. Everything had been calculated from the very first moment. There's more, Victoria said quietly, and she pulled up social media profiles on her screen. A woman named Alexis Porter, 28 years old, blonde and beautiful, her Instagram feed filled with luxury vacations and designer purchases. And there, in the background of a beach photo, partially obscured but unmistakable, was Marcus. She's his partner, Victoria said. They're listed as co-owners of Riverside Holdings. And Claire, they've done this before. At least twice that I can confirm in the past 7 years. They target successful women, usually professionals who've inherited money or businesses. Marcus gains their trust, marries them, systematically drains their assets, then disappears before anyone realizes what's happening. The women are left with nothing, no money, no property, often with destroyed credit and legal problems from the fraudulent documents Marcus creates in their names. Claire sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of the deception. She wasn't just a victim. She was the latest in a series of victims, all carefully selected and systematically destroyed by a man who'd turned betrayal into a profitable career. How much has he taken? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria pulled up a spreadsheet she'd been building. From your joint accounts, approximately $230,000 over the past 18 months. From your mother's accounts, including the refinancing and home equity line, approximately $400,000. There's also evidence that he's been setting up shell companies using forged documents with your signature, which could potentially expose you to significant legal liability. The numbers felt abstract, surreal. Claire had built a successful company, prided herself on her intelligence and business acumen, and yet she'd been completely blind to the fact that her husband was systematically robbing her and her mother. Claire's phone buzzed with a text message around midnight. The screen glowed in the darkness of the hotel room where she'd checked in under Nicole's name, and she stared at the words with a detachment that felt almost surreal. Missing you already. Hope the flight wasn't too rough. Call me when you land tomorrow morning. He'd even added a heart emoji at the end. That small digital symbol that was supposed to represent affection but now felt like mockery. Claire didn't respond immediately. Instead, she calculated the time difference, thought about when someone arriving in Berlin after an overnight flight would reasonably be expected to call, and made a note to contact him at the appropriate hour. Every detail mattered now. Every action had to support the fiction that she was exactly where he believed her to be. Morning arrived with gray light filtering through the hotel curtains. Claire showered and dressed mechanically, then drove to Park Slope before she could second-guess the decision. Her mother was an early riser, always had been, and Claire knew she would find her awake even at 7 in the morning. The townhouse looked exactly as it always had, its brick facade warm in the morning sun, the garden her father had planted still thriving despite his absence. Claire sat in her car for several minutes, gathering courage for a conversation she desperately didn't want to have. How do you tell your mother that the man she trusted, the man who'd fixed her leaking faucets and reviewed her bank statements and treated her with such apparent kindness, had been systematically robbing her? Her mother answered the door in her bathrobe, surprise and pleasure crossing her face when she saw Claire. Claire, sweetheart, what are you doing here? I thought you were flying to Berlin yesterday. Change of plans, Mom. Can I come in? She stepped aside, already moving toward the kitchen to make coffee, that automatic hospitality that had been ingrained in her since childhood. Claire followed her through rooms filled with furniture that had witnessed 3 generations of family life, past photographs on the walls showing her father's face frozen in moments of happiness, to the kitchen where sunlight streamed through windows overlooking the garden. Is everything all right? her mother asked, setting 2 mugs on the counter. You look tired. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you show me any paperwork Marcus has given you recently? Anything related to the house or your bank accounts? Her mother's expression shifted from pleasant concern to confusion. What's this about, Claire? Please, Mom. Just show me what you have. She disappeared into the small office off the living room, the space Claire's father had used to manage household finances, and returned with a folder containing documents Claire had never seen before. She spread them across the kitchen table and felt her stomach drop as she read through page after page of legal paperwork that her mother had signed without understanding. Marcus had refinanced the brownstone 18 months ago, taking out a new mortgage that was nearly double the remaining balance on the original loan. He'd also opened a home equity line of credit for an additional $250,000. The documents were sophisticated, filled with legal language that would have confused anyone without a background in real estate law. And Marcus had explained them to Claire's mother as routine administrative updates that would lower her monthly expenses and simplify her financial management. You said this would make things easier, her mother said quietly, watching Claire read. You said the payments would go down. I never said that, Mom. Marcus said that. But you signed too, right here. Claire pointed to a signature line, and she saw her own name written in handwriting that was close enough to hers to pass casual inspection, but not quite right in the details. The forgery was good, professional, the work of someone who had practiced. When did he have you sign these? Claire asked, keeping her voice as steady as possible. About 1.5 years ago. He brought them by one afternoon when you were traveling for work. He said you'd already reviewed everything and approved it, that he just needed my signature to finalize the paperwork. I trusted him, Claire. He's your husband. Why wouldn't I trust him? Claire pulled up her banking app and accessed her mother's accounts using the information she'd been given years ago for emergencies. What she found made the room tilt slightly. The refinancing had generated over $350,000 in cash, money that should have been deposited into her mother's account. Instead, it had vanished into accounts registered to Riverside Holdings, the shell company Victoria had identified. The monthly mortgage payments had not been made in 4 months. Late fees and penalties had accumulated. The bank had filed foreclosure proceedings 2 weeks ago, sending notices to a post office box that Marcus controlled. Mom, Claire said carefully, when was the last time you actually received a bank statement in the mail? Her mother thought about it, confusion deepening on her face. Marcus said he had everything switched to electronic statements to save paper. He said he would review them and let me know if there were any problems. Of course he had. He'd intercepted every piece of communication that might have alerted her to what was happening. She'd been living in her home with no idea that she was about to lose it. Your house is in foreclosure, Claire told her, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. The auction is scheduled for Tuesday. The color drained from her mother's face. She sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, her hand reaching out to grip the table edge. That's not possible. Marcus said everything was fine. He said the new mortgage made everything easier. Marcus has been stealing from you, Mom. From both of us. And I'm going to stop him, but I need you to trust me now and not contact him about any of this. Can you do that? Her mother nodded slowly, tears beginning to track down her face, and Claire felt rage burn through her with renewed intensity. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about destroying an elderly woman's sense of security, about taking advantage of her grief and vulnerability, about violating the trust she'd extended to someone she believed was family. That afternoon, Claire drove to downtown Manhattan to meet with Andrew Mitchell, the corporate attorney who'd handled Sterling's legal matters since her father first started the company. She'd called ahead to tell him she needed to see him urgently and privately, that she couldn't come to Sterling's offices because she was supposed to be in Berlin and couldn't risk being seen by employees who might mention it to Marcus. Andrew's office occupied the 45th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Hudson River, all polished surfaces and expensive art that projected competence and success. He met her in a private conference room, his expression grave as she laid out everything Victoria had discovered about Marcus's true identity and the scope of his fraud. I need to know if the company is vulnerable, Claire told him, spreading documents across the conference table. If he's been stealing from me personally and from my mother, what's to stop him from going after Sterling? Andrew reviewed the papers with increasing alarm, his expression darkening as he recognized the sophistication of the forgeries. These are good, he said quietly. Really good. Someone with inside knowledge of how your corporate paperwork is structured created these. He pulled up digital files on his laptop, comparing the forged documents to legitimate ones in Sterling's records. The similarities were disturbing. Marcus had somehow gained access to corporate templates, authorization forms, insurance documents that should have been completely secure. If he presents these to the right people at the right time, Andrew said, he could potentially freeze company assets pending resolution of ownership questions. He could make a claim against the business in a divorce proceeding. He might even be able to position himself as having a stake in the company through some of these forged authorizations. Claire's father's legacy, everything she'd built over 5 years of relentless work, all of it vulnerable because she'd trusted the wrong person. What do we do? She asked. We file protective orders immediately. Emergency injunctions preventing any transfer of corporate assets or ownership claims. I'll have them drafted and filed within 2 hours. We'll also need to notify your bank, your business accounts, and any investment portfolios. We need to freeze everything before he can access it. Andrew paused, studying Claire's face. There's something else you should consider. If Marcus has been doing this to other women, as your forensic accountant suggested, then this isn't just civil fraud. This is criminal enterprise. You should contact the FBI. That evening, Claire returned to her hotel room and did something she'd been avoiding since this nightmare began. She called Marcus, not from her regular phone, but from a burner device Victoria had purchased for her, routing the call through a VPN service that would make it appear she was calling from Berlin. Every detail had to be perfect. Every element of the performance had to be flawless. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with what Claire now recognized as manufactured affection. Hey babe, how was your first day at the conference? Claire forced herself to sound tired but enthusiastic. She described presentations she'd never seen, speakers she'd never heard, networking sessions that never happened. She talked about the hotel overlooking Alexanderplatz, the German food she'd tried for dinner, the jet lag that was making her feel slightly disconnected from reality. Marcus responded with what seemed like genuine interest, asking questions that showed he'd researched the conference thoroughly to maintain his deception. He wanted to know which sessions she'd attended, what the keynote speakers had discussed, whether she'd met any interesting contacts for potential business. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, and by the end, Claire felt exhausted from the effort of maintaining the lie. But it was necessary. Marcus needed to believe everything was proceeding according to his plan. I miss you, he said before they hung up. Can't wait until you're home on Sunday. Miss you too, Claire managed to say, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Claire marveled at his skill even as revulsion churned in her stomach. How many times had he said those words while meaning absolutely nothing? How many moments of intimacy had been nothing but performance, calculation, strategic manipulation designed to keep her compliant and trusting? Over the next 3 days, Claire built her case with ruthless efficiency. Victoria traced every dollar Marcus had stolen, creating a comprehensive financial forensic report that documented the pattern of theft over 18 months. Andrew filed emergency protective orders with the courts, securing injunctions that prevented any transfer of assets from Sterling's cyber defense or Claire's personal accounts. Claire also hired Thomas Hayes, a private investigator who specialized in fraud cases and had worked with several law firms on complex white-collar crime investigations. Thomas was in his 50s, a former NYPD detective who'd left the force to start his own investigative firm. He had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. Within 48 hours, Thomas had uncovered information that made Victoria's initial findings seem like just the surface of Marcus's criminal enterprise. Marcus and Alexis maintained an apartment in Queens under assumed names, their real operations center, where they'd been planning their escape for months. Thomas obtained photographs showing documents, computer equipment, and evidence of at least 3 other women they'd targeted in the past 5 years. They're professional con artists, Thomas told Claire during a meeting at his office on Wednesday afternoon. This is how they make their living. Marcus identifies successful women, usually through professional conferences or networking events. He researches them thoroughly, determines their vulnerabilities, then creates a persona designed to appeal specifically to them. The courtship is calculated. The marriage is strategic. And the theft is systematic. How long does it usually take? Claire asked, her voice hollow. Depends on the target. With you, it's been 9 years, which is longer than usual. I think your father's death and your mother's vulnerability created additional opportunities they decided to exploit. Normally, they complete the con in 3 to 5 years, then disappear and start over with new identities. On Wednesday evening, Thomas called with crucial information. They're meeting tonight at a restaurant in Chelsea. 7 o'clock. Based on the conversations I've intercepted, I think they're celebrating. They believe everything's going according to plan. Claire made a decision. I'm going to be there. That's risky, Thomas warned. If they see you. They won't. But I need to hear them. I need evidence in their own words. That evening, Claire sat 3 tables away from Marcus and Alexis at an upscale Chelsea restaurant, her appearance altered with a dark wig and glasses Thomas had provided, a recording device concealed in her purse. She watched them toast with champagne, celebrating what they believed was their successful con. Their conversation was damning. They discussed the timeline for liquidating her mother's property, dividing the proceeds, and their planned move to Costa Rica. Alexis laughed about how the Ice Queen had no idea what was coming. Marcus described Claire as pathetically trusting and boasted about how easy she'd been to manipulate. I actually felt a little bad this time, Alexis said, swirling her champagne. The mother was sweet. Reminded me of my grandmother. Marcus shrugged. Collateral damage. We'll be set up nicely in Costa Rica with this payout. Maybe take a break for a year or 2 before we find the next one. Every word was captured on the recording device, and Claire felt something cold and hard settle in her chest as she listened. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was determination. Thursday morning, the day Marcus believed was the foreclosure auction for her mother's property, Claire returned home. She'd coordinated carefully with Andrew, Victoria, and Thomas. The FBI had been contacted and was prepared to make arrests based on the evidence they'd gathered. Marcus was still asleep when Claire walked into their bedroom at 6 a.m., turning on all the lights. He sat up, confusion and then alarm crossing his face as his eyes adjusted and he recognized her. Claire. What, you're supposed to be in Berlin. What happened? I forgot my passport, she said calmly, watching his face. Came back to get it and heard something interesting. You, actually. Discussing how to steal everything from me and my mother. She watched realization dawn in his eyes, the moment he understood that everything had fallen apart, that his carefully constructed plan had collapsed because of a single forgotten document. I can explain, he started, scrambling out of bed. No need. I've heard enough. The police are on their way. So is the FBI. Fraud across state lines makes this federal. Your friend Alexis is being arrested right now at your Queens apartment. And that restaurant conversation you had last night about Costa Rica and how pathetically trusting I am? Every word was recorded. Marcus's face went white. He looked toward the bedroom door, perhaps calculating whether he could make it past her, but Thomas Hayes stepped into the doorway, blocking his exit. Behind Thomas, 2 NYPD officers appeared, followed by FBI agents. Marcus Reed, one of the FBI agents said, "You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As they read him his rights and placed handcuffs on his wrists, Marcus looked at Claire with an expression that might have been respect or might have been hatred. "You were smarter than I thought," he said. "You forgot something important," Claire replied quietly. "I protect people from threats for a living. I analyze vulnerabilities and build defenses against attacks. You, Marcus, were just another threat to neutralize." The arrests made local and then national news. The investigation revealed that Marcus and Alexis had defrauded at least 5 women over the past decade, stealing an estimated $3 million collectively. Some of the victims had lost everything: their homes, their businesses, their savings. One woman had attempted suicide after discovering the extent of the betrayal and the debt Marcus had accumulated in her name. The trial took 8 months. Claire testified calmly and methodically, presenting mountains of evidence: financial records, forged documents, the restaurant recording, testimony from Victoria and Thomas. Victoria's forensic analysis proved devastating to the defense, tracing every dollar and documenting the sophisticated pattern of theft. Marcus and Alexis were both convicted on multiple federal counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. Marcus received 15 years in federal prison. Alexis received 12 years. The judge noted the predatory nature of their scheme and the vulnerability of their victims in determining the sentences. Asset forfeiture proceedings recovered approximately 60% of the stolen money, which was distributed among the victims. Claire recovered most of what had been taken from her and her mother, though some funds had already been spent and couldn't be recovered. Her mother's townhouse was saved from foreclosure. The fraudulent liens were released, and ownership was securely restored. Claire established a trust to ensure her mother would never face financial vulnerability again. Sterling's cyber defense emerged stronger from the ordeal. Claire implemented new security protocols based on her painful education, not just for digital threats, but for the human vulnerabilities that made fraud possible. She developed a training program for her employees about recognizing and preventing identity theft and financial fraud. The company's reputation for comprehensive security actually improved, and several new clients signed contracts specifically because they were impressed by how Claire had handled her personal crisis. 2 years later, Claire stood in front of a conference audience in San Francisco, delivering a keynote speech about a different kind of security threat: intimate partner fraud. She'd transformed her experience into advocacy work, creating a nonprofit organization called Trust Shield that helped other victims recognize warning signs, protect themselves legally, and recover from financial betrayal. Her presentation included practical advice: how to maintain financial independence even in marriage, red flags to watch for in relationships, resources for victims, legal steps to protect assets. The audience listened with rapt attention. Several people approached her afterward, sharing their own stories of betrayal and thanking her for speaking openly about hers. "You probably saved my life," one woman told her, tears in her eyes. "I've been seeing the same warning signs you described. I thought I was paranoid, but now I know I need to investigate." Claire never remarried. She'd dated occasionally over the past 2 years, but trust didn't come easily anymore. She'd learned to recognize the difference between genuine interest and calculated charm, between real vulnerability and strategic manipulation. Most men found her too guarded, too analytical, too quick to question inconsistencies. She couldn't bring herself to care. She threw herself into her work instead. Sterling's cyber defense expanded to 80 employees across 5 cities, becoming one of the most respected cybersecurity firms on the East Coast. Her mother lived peacefully in the Park Slope townhouse until passing away at 92, surrounded by 3 generations of family memories that Marcus had nearly stolen. In her will, her mother left the brownstone to Claire with a note: "You saved this house and everything our family built. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. I am too. Never doubt your strength, my darling girl." Claire kept the note in her desk drawer and read it whenever she felt the old wounds threatening to reopen. Some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. She'd learned to live with hers, to understand that they were evidence of battle survived, of strength discovered in the wreckage of broken trust. The woman who'd driven away from that townhouse years ago, trusting, perhaps naive in her belief that love was always genuine, was gone forever. The woman who remained was harder, wiser, infinitely more careful about who she allowed into her life and what information she shared. But she'd also built something meaningful from the wreckage. At a charity gala for Trust Shield, a colleague asked if she ever regretted not going to Berlin that day, if she ever wondered what would have happened if she hadn't forgotten her passport. Claire thought about it for a moment, remembering the panic of discovering her forgotten passport, the sick feeling of driving back home, the moment her world shattered in that foyer as she listened to her husband plot her destruction. "No," she said finally. "That forgotten passport saved everything that mattered. It gave me the chance to fight back before it was too late. It showed me who I really was beneath the trust and love, someone strong enough to survive betrayal and build something better from the pieces." She raised her glass in a silent toast, to survival, to second chances, to the strength discovered when you refuse to let deception define you. And to freedom. Above all else, to freedom. The end.